The roar of a bulldozer jolted me awake, cutting through the silence before my alarm had a chance to sound. That was strange. Since when did my peaceful suburban neighborhood have construction crews working this early? Groggy, I fumbled for my phone, only to spot an unread email from the HOA. The subject line hit me like a punch to the gut. Notice of land reallocation. Immediate action required. My heart raced as I sat up. What was this nonsense? I opened the email, but I barely got past the first line before anger and disbelief took over. They were taking my land, not requesting, not negotiating, just seizing it. For what? A golf course. My backyard was about to become the third hole of the shiny new HOA golf club, and I had no say in it whatsoever. I yanked the curtains open, and there they were, a cluster of HOA board members standing smugly at my property line, nodding approvingly as workers staked out the ground. My fence. Gone. Vanished overnight like it had never been there. My land, my sanctuary after endless workdays, was now theirs, claimed by these entitled HOA clowns. Slipping into my slippers, I stormed outside, fury building with every step. What the hell do you think you're doing? I yelled. The group turned slowly, like aristocrats mildly annoyed by a peasant's outburst. Leading them was Greg Harper, HOA president and perpetual thorn in my side. His fake, blindingly white smile begged for a fist to wipe it off. "Oh, Tom, good to see you," Greg said smoothly, stepping forward. "I assume you got the notice?" "Yeah, I got it," I snapped. "I just didn't realize the HOA had turned into a dictatorship overnight." Greg sighed, as if I were a toddler mid-tantrum. "Tom, it's all in the fine print of the HOA agreement. The community voted, and your backyard's perfect for our golf course expansion. It'll boost property values for everyone, including you." "Really?" "Because it feels more like robbery." Greg clapped a hand on my shoulder like we were buddies. Now, don't be dramatic. You'll be fairly compensated, of course. The HOA's offering you a 2-year voucher for free access to the course." I stared at him, deadpan. "So you're stealing my land, and in return, I get to play golf on it? That's not compensation. That's insane, illegal, and begging for a lawsuit." Greg chuckled, patting my shoulder again. "Oh, Tom, you really should have read your HOA contract more closely." I clenched my jaw. "I never agreed to this." He raised an eyebrow. "Actually, you did. Remember that neighborhood meeting you skipped last year? The one about community improvement initiatives?" I did remember. I also remember ditching it because it sounded like a boring debate about flower beds or street signs, not a scheme to swipe my property. Greg's grin widened. "Well, at that meeting, the members voted for a clause allowing land reallocation for community benefit. And as HOA president, I have the authority to greenlight it." My blood boiled. "So you tricked everyone into approving this, then used it to take my land?" Tom, Greg tooted, shaking his head. "It's not theft, it's progress." I balled my fists. This couldn't be real. But the workers measuring my yard and the smug board members proved otherwise. They were forging ahead like it was a done deal. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice steady. "All right, let's say I don't drag this to court. Let's say I let you have my land. There's still one little issue." Greg chuckled, amused. "Oh, what's that?" I grinned. "You might have taken my land, but you forgot something. I own the water." His smirk faltered. "What?" he asked, his tone losing its edge. "You heard me. That fancy golf course needs water to keep the grass green. And guess what? The only well in this neighborhood is under my property. I control the water supply for the whole HOA." Greg blinked, the realization slamming into him. I leaned in, savoring his unease. "So go ahead, build your course. Without my water, you'll have a very expensive sandbox." He recovered fast, though his confidence wobbled. "Tom, let's not be rash. We can work something out." I stepped back, stretching dramatically. "Oh, I'm being plenty reasonable. More than you were when you bulldozed my yard without asking." Greg opened his mouth, then shut it, his face twisting in frustration. He turned to his whispering board members, panic creeping into their eyes. I headed inside, calling over my shoulder. "Good luck with that golf course. I hear cacti are hot in landscaping right now." I slammed the door and leaned against it, exhaling. They thought they'd won. They thought they could steamroll me. But they'd messed with the wrong guy, and this was just the start. Within days, my lush backyard was unrecognizable. The grass I'd tended for years was ripped out, replaced by pristine, artificial turf. The old oak where I'd hung my hammock? Reduced to a stump. My fire pit was gone, swapped for a putting green. The construction noise was nonstop, saws, drills, and the occasional smug cheer from a board member acting like they were masterminding a masterpiece. Greg strutted around like a monarch, barking orders and laughing with his cronies. Every time he saw me on my porch, he flashed that same infuriating grin, daring me to act. I didn't yet. I waited. I watched. Trouble brewed 2 days after they installed the irrigation system. Sipping coffee on my porch, I noticed a worker fiddling with the sprinkler controls near my old property line. He looked irritated, jabbing at the screen like it wouldn't cooperate. I hid a smile behind my mug. Greg rolled up an hour later in his golf polo, interrogating the crew about the delay. They brushed it off as a minor glitch. It wasn't minor. By noon, the sprinklers still hadn't fired up. The fancy turf and imported grass were wilting fast in the heat. Without water, their precious course was doomed. The first neighbors to notice were the ones nearest the site. They'd bragged about their soon-to-skyrocket property values, but that glee faded when their own water pressure tanked. Complaints flooded the neighborhood group chat by day's end, turning it into a battlefield. People were pissed, confused, and Greg was scrambling to douse the flames. Metaphorically, since real fires might have been easier to handle than an HOA uprising. By day 3, desperation set in. The golf course looked rough. Brown patches spread across the grass, and cracked soil peeked through the fairway. The HOA tapped the community's backup reserves, but those tied back to my well, still off. Greg showed up at my door that afternoon, his swagger dimmed. "Tom," he said, forcing warmth, "I think we got off on the wrong foot." I leaned against the frame. "Which foot was that?" He gave a tight laugh. "Listen, I get it. You're upset about the land. Maybe we could have handled it better." "Better? Like not stealing my yard?" He ignored that. "We're having water supply issues, and I hear you own the well." "Yep," I said slowly. His smile twitched. "So, how about we make a deal? Something fair for everyone." I pretended to mull it over. "Like the fair deal where you took my land without asking." Greg sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, Tom, be reasonable. The whole neighborhood's suffering. Lawns are dying. Values are dropping. This isn't just about the course." I stared at him. "You're right. It's about how you and the HOA think you can bully people without consequences." His smile strained. "What's it going to take?" I grinned. "Oh, I don't think you can afford my price." Panic flickered in his eyes, not just about the course, but his reputation, his power. That night, I heard the board whispering, doubting Greg, questioning this fiasco. Desperation breeds stupidity, and the HOA was about to prove it. Next morning, they tried drilling a new well, a costly Hail Mary to cut me out. Too bad the local water table was a nightmare to tap. My well worked because it was perfectly placed. Their attempt was a money pit. I watched from my porch as they floundered. By afternoon, their budget was bleeding, and a new email hit everyone's inbox. Emergency water fees to cover the mess. The backlash was instant. Homeowners raged in the chat. Why pay for Greg's flop? The revolt was on. Greg underestimated me, and the neighbors he'd conned. With lawns turning to dust and patience gone, they were ready to oust him. I sipped my coffee, watching the chaos unfold. They'd taken my land, but I held the real power, and I wasn't done. The HOA imploded. The golf course withered, a pathetic monument to Greg's ego. The water fees sparked a firestorm. Neighbors who'd once trusted him now demanded answers. Greg clung to control, calling frantic meetings and sending emails promising fixes, but his grip was slipping. He even tried tapping city water miles away, an absurd, bankrupting pipe dream. I loved watching him flail. By day 4 of the water crisis, rebellion erupted. Homeowners packed HOA meetings, furious, demanding refunds in Greg's head. His smug mask cracked. Every jab about the useless course or his rushed plan tightened his jaw. That evening, he knocked again, haggard and desperate. "We need to talk," he said, voice brittle. I took my time opening the door. "About what?" His jaw clenched. "The water. The HOA. Everything's collapsing." "Yeah, I noticed," I said, feigning surprise. He exhaled hard. Cut the games. What do you want? Oh, I don't know, my yard back. An HOA apology for screwing me? Maybe you saying sorry. His face darkened. Be reasonable. I laughed. Reasonable? Where was that when you demolished my fence at midnight? You think you've won, he growled. I know I have. Fine, he spat. Take your land. Just turn the water on, now. I shook my head. Nope. Water stays off until the HOA's dissolved. He gaped. You're kidding. Nope. No more rules, no corrupt board, no Greg Harper lording over us. Dissolve it, and the water flows. His face reddened. That's not how this works. It is now. Greg floundered, but he was cornered. Homeowners against him, course dead. HOA broke. Next morning, an emergency vote was called. The meeting room overflowed with fed-up neighbors. Greg begged, claiming the HOA was vital, but no one cared. They'd seen his greed. The vote was unanimous. The HOA was toast. Greg slumped, defeated, his reign over. I flipped the water on that night. Sprinklers hummed, lawns revived, and neighbors cheered. The golf course stayed a ruin. Nobody wanted it. A week later, Greg's house hit the market. Word was he'd sunk himself, keeping the HOA afloat. He slunk away without a goodbye. I reclaimed my yard. New fence, fresh garden, back to normal. Months later, I leased a slice for a pickleball court. Nothing fancy, but the neighborhood loved it. The thwack of paddles rang out day and night. Wherever Greg was, I knew he hated it. That made it all worthwhile.